It's a test now, I'm trying to remember a memory of a memory. How we'd run and point at a plane in the sky, not an everyday occurrence. And when they did fly over, mine automatically assumed it would drop a bomb on them. On me. As if the world was just something on the periphery. I don't remember what my mother looked like. I was 5 when she died. Pneumonia. There were no danglings on the knee and darlings. I had a brother, bless him. One brother. He died last year. What a posh name, Gilbert. No, 2 brothers. I've remembered another one. Gilbert, Samuel and Edgar. And Ralph. Ralph. Such splendid names. I'm sure I must have had something to do with choosing them. I was an idiot for words. I was called Dudes at school. Imagine. It probably meant something horrific. Ralph was in groups set up to perform plays in a local church where they displayed. Where they acted, yes. And being handsome, of course, he got all the good parts. It's always the lovely people who disappear, that things happen to. As if God doesn't care. When my father died, people were very kind. They wrote to me and said things like, "We will always remember him, and if you need anything, just come to us." Rather tear-jerking stuff like that. I was evacuated to Luton. It was a funny business going on once. The great special forgetful moment. We were quite big as schoolgirls in the playground when the rumour went round. We were given a letter to take home. It said, "Would you like to be evacuated?" All the rumours went round that the girls were going to Australia or South Africa, somewhere sunny, everything at the crown jewels. The truth is, we were going to Luton. Nuts in Luton. We didn't know how low that was in people's estimation. Where are all my books? I had more than 100 books. Steinbeck, Harper Lee, and children's literature, Grimm's fairy tales. I think those books teach children something about death, that it's all bound up with life. When I was a teacher, I used to love reading books to the children. I'd gather them all round in the last lesson on a Friday. I got the love of books from my sister. Did I say I had a sister? A family reading fairy stories while my poor mum was wasting away. Such sadness. Mother got pneumonia, cold and coughs. TB was the frightful one, the thing one mustn't forget. Days were full. There was always someone else to discover. We discovered each other and got flats like this. It seems to me that this room was part of my flat. Maybe it still is under the paintwork and so forth. As startling daylight broke, we looked up and there was no roof on this house anymore. I had a boyfriend back then. He wasn't a soldier, he was, if you didn't go to war, you had to do something else in that line. Any boyfriends I had were the ones that stayed at home. They took me places. And when the war ended, I was something like in my 20s for centuries. I can't pin it down. Although I was playing the part of the Virgin Mary, I was nothing of the kind. I went to work for a man called Mr. Love, but I didn't love him. And I used to write poetry. I was always in love with words. Ralph was a pilot. He's so handsome. He was killed in a direct crash with the Messerschmitts. His body was badly burned. For some reason, we had a funeral with an open coffin. I remember there were just parts under the cloth. It seems odd now to show that to a child. He was in a bomber, lining up the crosshairs. None of these people working here would even know there had been a war. The hearse drew up outside and neighbours came running from their nearest homes with bunches of flowers and wreaths and things to add to the sadness of the day. I was very patriotic. I don't know where I was getting that. I wouldn't hear a word about anything English. Scots and Irish weren't really in it. It's a false image you carry with you. You vaguely knew at the back of your mind that it's a false image, but you went along with it. A lot of it was actually made up. Propaganda. What a lovely word. I remember one night in the air raid shelter, they were all singing and they tried to be terribly patriotic, and when they looked up they could see the stars. No roof to help them in any way. Patriotism wouldn't have done them any good. A lot of things I remember and they remember and are remembered from various goings on. Well, they aren't as it was. I'm not sure it's right that I saw my brother in his coffin, but I remember it. It's something of history. There's quite a chunk of it missing now. I'm sure the children here don't believe it. Everyone lies. It doesn't even seem very likely that we were real people back then, the English. No one can beat us, nothing to fear, no bombs will drop on us. They are great stories, but they are just stories, some of them. Certain amount of truth, really enough. People who indulged in pretend bomb dropping, the government. No, it's gone. What's the name of the name? It's like you pull a lever and it's gone. This will come back. It's important to say. I think I belonged to a sort of Peace for Everyone campaign at one time. I did unpaid work to do with the fire service. We all felt terribly brave, but we weren't brave at all. We used to hug each other and hide in doorways. My husband was a sailor, Mr. Fisherman. Like the sea, is that right? No. I met him playing table tennis. He had a square collar, all the things sailors had back then, very funny. I don't think I liked him too much when I met him. In fact, I thought it was rubbish. I wanted a proper Englishman, and he had something to do with Australia. He wasn't a soldier, he was a sailor. He must have got kicked out of the army. His family went to Australia or came from Australia. He didn't read books, and I think I treated him as someone who couldn't read books, and that wasn't true at all. I'm not sure you could say that I ever fell in love, but he was fairly good looking and persistent. You could bear it. More persistent than good looking. Come to think of it, not even very persistent. Now you see that lady there, the plump one, I think she's taking over the rather strict teacher convention that were all naughty, naughty schoolgirls. Yes, that lady. The one I was with, she has the same talent as I do, in that she can't retain information for very long without forgetting lumps of it. Very frustrating for me, but it must be awful for the carers. What was I saying? Oh, today's education needs brushing up a bit in terms of looking after people and so on. Unfortunately, that lady I was speaking of, she screams. It seems incredible to me that they should have taken on people here who can't remember what they're doing and people who speak different languages and put them together. There's enough difficulty remembering and getting by without having people speaking a different language. It's not a good idea, whoever thought that one up. The other people, of course, are amazed at the lassitude, if that's the word. Well, I don't care if it's not, I won't even remember saying it. I've read so many notices, particularly on the walls, notices which are then withdrawn, unfortunately. However, this day, Christmas Day, I was woken up early and given a tray of sardine sandwiches or something like that. What was it I was saying? Oh yes, the fire warden must have been a conscientious objector, which meant that from his point of view the war was a bad thing. And so he'd run from street to street looking for people who'd failed. He'd be shouting, "Put out that light!" I've lost the trail again. Was I telling you that I used to write poetry? I can remember it roughly, but nothing to write home about. A rather violent sort of poetry.